of sorted bottles. The entrance had new glass doors and a keypad. The caretaker raised one hand behind the desk. He looked smaller, though he still wore a navy cardigan. The lobby smelled of wet wool and warm radiator dust. It had once meant I was nearly home. Now it seemed to belong to the building itself. A coat over the chair had dark shoulders where snow had melted. The key was in a tin downstairs, he said, and the basement light was unreliable. I could wait by the heater while he searched. I had nowhere else to be, and the roads were quiet under snow. Even so, I did not sit beside his desk. I studied the residence directory. Its plastic letters were new. A delivery notice curled above the heater grill. None of the old names remained. The elevator stood opposite. Its brushed steel doors were new, but the black seam between them was familiar. Two shallow grooves crossed the threshold. The old mirror had survived. 3 panels reached the ceiling, their edges dark enough to cut every reflection apart. I saw my coat, the empty chair, and the open ledger in dim layers of glass. I looked for where my childhood height would have ended. The elevator arrived without being called. Yellow light crossed the floor. While I waited, I decided to see whether the 8th floor doors were still blue. I still knew how long the old car had taken to reach them. I pressed 8. Its ring lit amber, and the doors met with a soft rubber contact I remembered better than our apartment door. Before the car moved, 3 lit by itself. No hand was near the panel. The light held steady, and the elevator began to rise. At 12, I stopped there after cram school. A low stairwell window showed snow on the bicycle shed. I waited until my breath stopped clouding it. The doors opened on 3. A pale umbrella rested in a bucket, and rubber boots stood on newspaper farther down the empty corridor. Meltwater darkened the paper around their soles. Someone coughed behind a wall. Water moved through a pipe. The elevator waited open, wasting heat in the ordinary way elevators do. As the doors met, 6 lit above my hand. That had been my second stop. A family's television carried the late news theme into the landing. At 12, that sound was company. I counted 1 weather report before taking the last 2 floors. My mother cleaned offices at night, and 803 was dark. The elevator stopped on 6. A television murmured behind a door. A heater pipe clicked twice, paused, then clicked once. The building had kept a few sounds. Snow made a dull square in the stairwell glass, and the years between visits felt like an accounting error. No one entered. On 8, the corridor was narrower than I remembered. Gray walls replaced cream, and 803 had a pale green door with a digital lock. I stayed near the elevator, my thumbnail pressing into my palm as though the lost key were already there. The elevator chimed behind me. The lobby button was lit, though I had not pressed it. The empty car resembled a light left on in another room. I stepped inside. As the doors closed, I caught the mirror behind me. A sheet of paper was taped across the middle panel. Thick black marker made it easy for children to read. During snow, please leave wet shoes outside. 1 missing character was squeezed above the line. The final stroke leaned down, exactly as I remembered it. I turned. The steel wall behind me was bare. There were no tape marks, no paper, only my own dark coat, reflected faintly in the metal. In the mirror, the notice remained. 1 corner folded under clear tape. A brown drip crossed the last characters. I had traced it with 1 mitten, while the other dried on the radiator. The notice was gone before we moved. It came down in middle school, after someone complained that corridor shoes blocked the fire route. I knew that, because I had watched the caretaker scrape away the tape with the edge of a ruler. A clean rectangle stayed on the mirror for months. The elevator passed 7, then 6 lit again. The descending car slowed display changed from 7 to 6 and held. The doors opened on the third floor stairwell window. The display still showed 6. Beyond the doors, glass, fogged at a child's height, held 3 clear fingertip circles. The corridor itself was the renovated one. Gray walls, digital locks, white plastic baseboards, but the light from the window lay across the floor in the old yellow color I remembered. The lobby button did not light. I pressed close, then one, then touched the alarm cover. The mirrored notice trembled with the motor. The doors closed. For a few seconds, the elevator ran normally. I heard the cable, the guide shoes against the rail, and water ticking from my coat onto the rubber floor. That ordinary machinery helped. I counted the sounds. I told myself the floor display had failed, and the mirror was holding some stain beneath its backing. Then the television theme began outside the car. 4 thin, descending notes came through the wall. The elevator moved, but the old news theme stayed beside it, as if the 6th floor traveled with me. I remembered my canvas bag, its split vinyl handle, and my mother's orange repair thread. I remembered not wanting the weather report to finish. The buttons went dark, then 3 lit, then 6, then 8. Each waited for the previous ring to fade, following my old rhythm. I had invented that route during one February when my mother's shifts changed. 3 for the window, 6 for the television, 8 when I could no longer pretend I was still on my way. I told no one. Before we moved, I trained myself to ride straight home, and the stops became something childish I chose not to remember. The doors opened again. Apartment 803 stood directly opposite, although the elevator should have opened beside the stairwell. The pale green door was there, but beneath the digital lock hung our old brass mail slot. On the concrete outside sat a pair of wet school shoes. They were small, dark, canvas shoes with softened heels. Water had gathered beneath them in 2 uneven shapes. One lace trailed into the wet. White socks marked a short path from the elevator and ended at the door. No one stood in the corridor. Nothing moved except the weak line of water creeping toward a seam in the floor. I remembered the last time I had left my shoes there. Snow had soaked through them on the walk from the tram stop. I removed them because of the notice and reached into my bag for the key. The key was gone. My mother was working. I sat with my back against 803 in my socks and listened to the building settle while the shoes slowly stopped shining. I must have gone downstairs eventually. I remember the caretaker giving me tea from his metal flask. I remember sleeping in the chair by his desk until my mother came through the glass doors. What I did not remember was returning to the 8th floor. In the elevator, the old shoes remained beyond the open doors. In the mirror, their reflection pointed the other way, toes facing the elevator as if they had been placed there before someone left. My phone rang. The sound was quiet, but the corridor disappeared between one ring and the next. Brushed steel faced me. The doors were closed. The lobby button glowed beneath my hand. The caretaker said he had found the tin, Clow. He asked whether I was still upstairs. I told him I was coming down, though the floor display already showed one. When the doors opened, he was standing by the desk with a small paper envelope. The radiator clicked behind him. His ledger was still open to the same page. He placed the key in my palm. It was brass, worn bright along one edge, with our surname written on a stiff paper tag. The string around it had faded from red to a color near brown. I asked whether the elevator ran an inspection pattern through 3, 6, and 8. He looked at the panel and said the replacement system had no such pattern. Maintenance used every floor in order. Then I asked about the winter notice. He remembered it at once. He said he had taken it down before the lobby renovation 25 years earlier because the tape had begun to stain the mirror. He rubbed the envelope with his glass entrance. Near the elevator were two wet marks, each no longer than my hand. They had the blunt outline of school shoes. My own footprints crossed beside them and continued alone over the lobby tile. Outside, snow filled the grooves in the pavement. I stood under the entrance lamp and turned the key tag over. On its blank side,